All right, guys, we're ready for our Four Seasons sunroom, and Daddy's gonna get a rec room with refreshments.
Oh no, we'll be sleeping under the stars.
Mom, what about the one with, the fun?
Nice try, little bro. It's a gym. My gym.
Hey, Grandma's getting her Four Seasons garden room. Weather tight and still like being outdoors.
Maybe a living room. Oh no, wait, a family hub.
Yeah!
No matter what the budget, the season, or the climate, Four Seasons sunrooms let you and your family enjoy the outdoors inside. Call now to receive your free, no-obligation brochure from the premier manufacturer of sunrooms since 1975.
More reasons for Four Seasons now.
To find out more, call toll-free 800-928-7007. That's 800-928-7007. Call 800-928-7007 today.
Wake up, America. I think I got something to say to you. I say this every week. I love the United States of America, and I want you to love the United States of America too. Office Hours with Dr. A is not a safe space. So enter at your own risk. You will be exposed to the truth, and I will endure the consequences. Again, rest assured, I will not try to put my brain into your head. I will, however, motivate you to think and to use the analytical part of your brain that very few people want to use because it requires actual effort, it requires actual work.
You've reached the office of Dr. Randy Arrington. Please have a seat, and the doctor will be with you in just a moment. Go.
Hey, hello, everybody. This is Dr. Randy Arrington, and welcome to Office Hours with Dr. A. And as usual, on the line with me is Lou Esposito. She is my producer, of course, you know that, and my sidekick. And I've also given her the honorary tactical naval aviation call sign of Wench. Do you know why? Because she doesn't take crap from anybody. Are you there, Lou?
I'm here, and guess who taught me not to take crap from anybody? That would be you.
No, probably JD or Stacy, but
Stacy.
You don't take crap from anybody. Okay, as I understand it, Lou, you have got something special lined up for Office Hours today. What do you got me into?
You know very well that we have Dr. Tom Lindsey from Texas Public Policy, which is a think tank out of Texas, with us today. Welcome, Dr. Lindsey.
Thank you for having me.
We're glad to have you.
Is this the same Tom Lindsey that went to the University of Chicago and got all his political science degrees there? And I think for a while, Tom, Dr. Lindsey, did you not work at the National Endowment for the Humanities?
That's right. I was deputy chairman during George W. Bush's second term. Okay. And you I think you bounced around a little bit. You've been a dean and a college president, various things, and now you're like the senior analyst there at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Is that correct? I don't know if I'm the senior analyst. I direct the Center for 10th Amendment Action as well as the Center for Higher Education here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Okay, very good. You know, what we're going to talk about today, we've got several issues that we need to discuss and inform our listeners about. We have at least 2 or 3 listeners out there, right, Lou?
Yeah, we have a lot more than that. Stop.
All right. Well, you know what? And you know what? And I need to get Dr. Lindsey's address so I can send him a copy of my latest book. It's called Politics in America, Lecture Notes of a Lunatic Professor. And, when I speak the truth, Tom, they call me a insane lunatic.
Actually, he's a lunatic because he landed jets on aircraft carriers, and only a lunatic would do that.
Well, that might be. Well, we'll get an address for Dr. Lindsey, and we'll send him a copy of that fine book.
Sounds great.
Thank you very much.
The United States, I think, incrementally has been moving away from the states being in charge of this republic. You know, we have a constitutional republic based on democratic principles, and certainly during the last 7 years with the current administration in the White House and running our bureaucracies, we have basically morphed into this Leviathan overreaching federal government and overreaching executive office of the presidency. There's been a lot of talk, and I read an article that was talking about your governor there in Texas, Greg Abbott. We'll get to that in a second. But there's been a lot of talk. Mark Levin talks about it. Hannity talks about it. We've discussed it too, Lou, about the states coming together and holding an Article 5 convention to put some amendments to the Constitution. Can you talk about the Article 5 convention so we can educate our listeners, Dr. Lindsey?
Yes. Under our Constitution, under Article 5, there are two methods or two vehicles proposed for considering new amendments. Congress can propose new amendments, or a convention of states can do it. Specifically, in order for the states to call for an Article 5 convention, you need 2/3, which today means you need 34 states to call for an Article 5 convention. If they do that, then the U.S. Congress has to follow the request, and then if 3/4 of the states approve any amendments that come out of the Article 5 convention, it becomes part of the Constitution.
Why do you think it was that the founding fathers, Tom, were so determined to put this Article 5 Convention of States method of amendment in our Constitution? Why do you think they thought that was so important?
Well, that's a great question, because it really speaks to what has happened to us today. At the time, at first, they were thinking only of having Congress propose amendments, but George Mason of Virginia, he reminded his fellow delegates that governments, by their very nature, always seek to grow, and that the new American government would be no different, and that therefore there was reason to doubt that if Congress began to overreach, that it would propose amendments to limit itself. And therefore, the second method of the states proposing amendments was argued for by Mason, and it was accepted at the convention.
I actually teach my students, when I teach them about public policy and our Constitution, that there's 3 ways to amend the Constitution. You mentioned the 2 formal methods. There's also a third, kind of an informal method, and that is judicial precedent. For instance, Roe v. Wade. A lot of people believe, and it's considered to be an amendment to the Constitution, that you have a right to an abortion. And that's not listed in the Constitution anywhere, but that is judicial precedent that has taken over and given it the weight of amendment. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I absolutely do. I think you stated well. This is part of the reason that Governor Abbott has joined the movement here to get 34 states to propose amendments, because for the last 100 years, the Supreme Court has tortured the American Constitution. It has created wholly new rights that were never approved nor even anticipated by the founders, nor anticipated by those who ratified the 14th Amendment. And this is the reason why we think that the states, acting through the power that's been given to them under the Constitution, are the last resort.
The actual Article 5 terminology, it says that the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, and this is the big or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof. What do you think the chances of this coming to fruition actually are?
Oh, well, that this power was granted under the original Constitution, and yet it's never been used. It's never been used because, although there have been efforts in the past for states to come together and to get 2/3 of them to propose an amendment, it's very, very difficult to get 2/3 of the states to agree on anything. But, that is really, in my view, a strength of our Constitution. After all, the Constitution was ratified by supermajorities, and therefore, to amend the Constitution, justice requires that supermajorities vote in favor of the amendment. Now, it's never happened But I think the reason it's never happened is because up until recently, I think that most people in most of the states thought that things were fundamentally sound. But unfortunately, that has changed. You may have seen the latest Pew National Survey. They asked Americans to choose among big government, big labor, and big business. And 69% of Americans said that they thought that big government was the biggest threat to their liberties. 69%.
I remember reading that, and I fully agree with that. I think the founders knew, and they were warning people about themselves, because I always talk about how all power corrupts, and that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what you have to do, I think, to be an effective politician and governor, putting forth public policies, is to surround yourself, one, with really smart people, and two, people that have the courage to make sure you keep one foot firmly planted in humility, lest you get really full of yourself. And I think that's happening right now. With
a lot of our politicians,
and the right side. I mean,
with a lot of our politicians. But I think it's a really common sense thing. If you think about it, when Reagan said, we actually talked about this at CPAC, and Reagan's comment that the most frightening words in the world are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." But it was a novel idea when he brought it up, but it is a very common sense thing that bigger government threatens liberty. It's common sense.
That's right. That's right. That's part of the reason we fought the Revolutionary War, and and you're right that it doesn't matter whether it's government by one, by few, or by the demos, by the majority in a democracy. The tendency always is for power to grow, and that's how we've gotten to the point where we are now.
After the convention to give us a constitution, Ben Franklin was walking around, and a woman walked up to him, and you know this story as well as I do. What have you given us today? I think they used to call him Dr. Franklin. He said, well, we've given you a republic if you can keep it.
If you can keep it.
That's the problem.
I think you'd be surprised we've kept it as long as we have.
Well, we have 230-some years, and most great nations don't last about 250 years, so we might be headed over the cliff. But I think the Founding Fathers were wise enough to know that the federal government might one day, how should I put this, become drunk with the abuses of their own power. So, in my humble opinion, the most important check to this power today is Article 5, because Article 5 gives the states the power to call this convention for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution. And by calling a convention of the states, what can we do? We can stop the runaway train wreck spending, this debt spree that we're on, the power grabs that have been coming from our federal court system, and the other basic misuses of federal power. So the current situation, Dr. Lindsey, if you agree with me, is precisely what the Founding Fathers feared, and as we know, they gave us a solution that we have, I think, a duty to utilize.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. I mean, we have this means at our disposal. In their wisdom, our Founding Fathers anticipated the very dilemma that we now face. We have seen that despite elections and changing parties, etc., that Washington, D.C. is either unwilling or unable to extricate Americans from the abyss into which it has thrust us. And so now the responsibility, and fortunately the power, is with us if we use it.
I think what we'll be doing by having this convention of the states, is it getting close? Do we have 34? I thought we had 32 signed on.
Well, there have been a number of movements going on for many years. The closest that any particular amendment has gotten toward hitting 34 is a balanced budget amendment. Now, calling for a balanced budget amendment is one of the 9 proposals in Governor Abbott's Texas plan. And I think
which we're going to talk about here, I think after the break. I did read that, and I definitely believe we need a balanced budget. I mean, I got my checkbook sitting right here in front of me. If I couldn't balance that checkbook for my family, I think they'd probably take me to jail. So we need a balanced budget amendment. I think the last time we balanced the budget was when Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House, and it was when Mr. Clinton was the president. They all said, well, we could balance the budget in 10 years, and that was the Democrats' idea. The Republicans said, we think we can do it in 7. Well, Newt Gingrich, with his contract with America, balanced the budget in 2 years.
Yes, that's right. And I mean, and look where we are now. By the time the current president leaves office next January, the national debt will be approximately $20 trillion. Now, this stifles economic progress, not only for this generation. Our children and our grandchildren have already been saddled with debt, and for the life of me, unless something is done about this, I don't see how they could have any kind of standard of living or any degree of individual liberty that we have come to expect from the United States of America.
I don't think there's $20 trillion of assets in the entire world, on the entire earth. So how can we pay this off? We'll have to cut back on several of the programs. I personally, I worked for the federal government for many, many years, and I know, first of all, that they lie constantly to you. Constantly. They lie to each other. The bureaucracies lie to each other because they want to get a bigger bite of that budget pie. So they constantly lie to each other. And they're lying to us every single day. And I hope the listeners know that and realize Dr. A is just speaking the truth, and I'll endure the consequences, but that's what's going on right now. And so the interest alone on that is mind-boggling, Dr. Lindsey.
That's right. Oh, I mean, it's staggering. There is absolutely no way, unless we start again to exercise some self-restraint. I mean, we see what's happening in, for example, Greece. Well, we may not be as far down the road as Greece is yet, but we're headed quickly in the direction of the same cliff.
Well, I think we're going to, after the break, we're going to get into those 9 amendments that are proposed by Governor Greg Abbott. But I know that another one, probably, we need to have some sort of a discussion and a redefinition of the general welfare clause. I think the original view was the federal government could not spend money on any topic without the jurisdiction of the states. And now that has changed. Now, if you are basically in the country, it doesn't matter how you got here, you're available, or you have all these assets and resources available to you because you are in the country. You're not a citizen, but you're a person in the state of Arizona, for instance. As such, you can't just be deported without due process. And I can tell you right now, the due process for these illegals just doesn't happen. They stay here forever and ever. And that's not racist, sexist, what homophobic, whatever. It's the truth. You can't have a nation, and Dr. Lindsey will back me up on this, without common language and borders. You got to have security, and we just don't have that.
Can we just assume? Can we just insert and assume that from now on, whenever we talk about an illegal immigrant, that they're either coming from Germany or the Netherlands? Would that make it less racist?
They're coming from Soviet Russia. I mean, the former Soviet Union, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, whatever.
I don't care. I don't care where they're coming from.
Right.
Yeah, and as Dr. A says, he's right. It's nothing to do with ethnicity or race. This is about the rule of law, on which the health of any regime depends. I mean, Abraham Lincoln, at the very young age of 29, gave a speech about reverence for the Constitution. He gave that speech in 1838, and he said that is the rock on which our democracy rests, is reverence for the Constitution and the rule of law. And when that is eroded, everything else will go with it.
You can't listen to me, folks. You cannot have a welfare society combined with an open borders nation. It just doesn't work. Eventually, you're going to run out of other people's money, like Margaret Thatcher taught us. Socialism, which is what that basically is, does not work ever. It can't work.
And with that epiphany, we're going to go to a break, and we will be back in just a couple minutes. Thanks for listening, guys. Office Hours on WNJC is brought to you by the Conservative Commando Radio Network.
the ship is run aground. The water is shallow and hazy. The storm is upon us, it's too late to turn around.
This is JD.
And this is Stacy.
Join us Tuesday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern for Game On. Remember,
lock up the children and the old folks.
Game On, the home of liberty-conservative conservatism.
Where no one is safe, no one is spared, not even the hosts.
Oh, that was supposed to be a spin cycle. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. We love you anyway. Right round, baby.
Self-monitoring
right
Ebola radio strikes again.
Anyway.
Anybody see the host monkey? Where's the host monkey? Where's the host monkey? For God's sake, I need an antidote. Just do your rant. Let's pop out of the segment.
Find us on Twitter at JD and Stacy.
You're listening to K98Talk.com.
I've seen this happen before. And there's a full moon out tonight. I'm a fool, but you can't fool me twice. I wear my secret deception just like a disguise. When I reveal myself in the light, stick around and you might pay the price. Enough with the questions, it's time that we said our goodbyes.
I knew that this wouldn't be easy.
Try not to tie it down.
Now nothing you say can appease me.
If you wanted to go, then you would have been gone before now. The darkness abounds.
All right, welcome back to Office Hours with Dr. Arrington, Dr. A, and Dr. Tom Lindsey. So I am the only non-doctor on the phone. So they're actually going to let me ask this next question. And this has been really kind of my big question about Article 5 convention, Dr. Lindsey, is are there any potential negative impacts of that?
Good question. And while I don't think that there are, I think we owe it to the audience here to know that there are two criticisms that are tied together. The first criticism is that a convention of states is such a long shot. After all, as I mentioned before the break, it's never happened in our history. That it's such a long shot, goes the first criticism, that it'll waste time and resources that could be better directed to more urgent questions. And the second criticism tied to that is, even if it were to happen, it could produce a runaway convention. And by runaway convention, they mean that there could be rogue delegates acting with the complicity of Congress, etc., that somehow we could end up going, that a convention that went in looking to limit the size of the government could come out having eliminated the Second Amendment. Right? That's the art. So those are the two arguments. It's a long shot, it'll never happen, and two, if it happens, it could go in a wrong direction. Let me first say that I have no fear that a convention of states would result in a quote-unquote runaway convention. And the reason for that is this. Under Article 5, under the Constitution, it takes 3/4 of the states to pass any amendment. Now, if that means that 13 states, 1/4 plus 1, 13 states can block any amendment that comes out, be it runaway or not. Now, if we've reached the point in this country where we don't believe that there are 13 states in the Union that would block any bad amendments, then we might have to just say that our experiment in self-government's over already. I don't think it's over. More importantly, Governor Abbott doesn't, and that's why he's proposed this. And then the second point on this, as I said, the first argument is that it's a long shot. And they're right. It's never happened in history. But as I said, it's supposed to be hard. But for that very reason, they're wrong in their second point that if it happened, it would lead to a runaway convention. Because think about it. If 34 states actually came together and agreed for the first time in history to propose amendments to rein in the federal government, think about all the political groundwork that would have to be done to get 34 states to agree on a proposed amendment. Think of all the coalitions that would have to be formed within states, between states, among regions. This is something that has never happened before in history. And so therefore, if it did, do we really believe that Congress or hidden wire pullers, lever pullers, think that they could somehow subvert the process and the nation just wouldn't notice? That seems to me to strain credulity, and that's why I don't worry about the so-called dangers of a runaway convention. Some of the very people who argue that it could produce a runaway convention at the same time argue that our constitutional convention in 1787 in Philadelphia was a runaway convention. I don't think it was, but I would also say to those people that I think that the Philadelphia Convention, in producing our Constitution, produced the greatest governing document in the history of the world. So if that was a runaway convention, I say let's have another one.
Great point, and that's the best explanation I've ever heard. I'm glad I asked you that question.
You know, in short, our federal, Lou, you and I talked about this offline just a little while ago. Our federal government has grown to, as Hobbes would say, Leviathan-like proportions. Mm-hmm. It has basically expanded, and as it has expanded its power, guess what's happened to individual liberty and the rule of law? Both of them have shrunk by comparison. It is a zero-sum game, in my humble opinion. Now, if Washington, D.C. has shown itself, as I believe it has, unable to extricate Americans from this terrible abyss, this political abyss that we've been thrust into, what can be done? And this is where I read about Governor Abbott's, I think it's a 92-page plan. It's called Restoring the Rule of Law with the States Leading the Way. And in that document, he proposes, I think it's 8 or 9 constitutional amendments to, how should I put this, curb federal overreach and to restore the constitutional balance of powers between the federal government and the various states. Dr. Lindsey, can you talk about this? Because I think he proposed this at your annual meeting of the TPP, Texas Public Policy Foundation, like last January, the beginning of January, I think. Can you talk about that?
Yes, that's right. It was in January. He proposed that at our annual meeting. He offers 9 proposed amendments, and I'll talk about them now. Before I do, let me say that the governor himself was the first to say in introducing his plan that he wants the Texas plan to begin a conversation, not to end it. Which is to say that I think he recognizes you put together 9 proposals on anything, and you're going to get some disagreement. His hope is that, and as we've seen here in the national polling, where overwhelming majorities all agree that the federal government has grown too big, his hope is that we can focus on those things we agree on and not let differences over 1 or 2 amendments stop us from doing what we need to do to restore liberty. So having said that, let me just very briefly say what the 9 amendments are. The first would prohibit Congress from regulating intrastate activity. That means economic activity that takes place within a state itself. As you know, under the Interstate Commerce Clause, Congress has the power to regulate commercial activity among the states. But what that has become, again, through bad Supreme Court interpretation of the Constitution in the late 30s, in a case Wickard v. Filburn, the Supreme Court actually decided that a farmer who was growing wheat only to feed his livestock, not selling it across state lines, nothing resembling interstate activity. Nevertheless, the court said that because it affects interstate commerce, Congress can regulate it. Now that is turning the Constitution upside down, and that's the reason that restoring the original meaning of the Constitution here is one of the governor's proposed amendments. Right. Another, as we talked about, would require Congress to balance the budget. 2 others would prohibit administrative agencies from creating federal law on their own, which unfortunately happens, and I think we could talk about the EPA for an hour all by itself in that respect. Correct. And also prohibit administrative agencies from preempting state law. 2 others would call for a 2/3 majority of states to override a U.S. Supreme Court decision or a federal law or regulation. Another would require a 7-justice Supreme Court majority to declare a democratically enacted law unconstitutional, as opposed to the 5 quota now. And then the last 2 would first limit federal power to those expressly delegated to the federal government under the Constitution. And the last one would allow states to sue in federal court to challenge federal overreach.
Well, that's a novel idea, considering it's certainly vigorously applied in the reverse. The federal government sues the states pretty much constantly.
That's right. That's right. So, we're and that's why, Governor Abbott calls his plan a plan to restore the purposes that guided our original Constitution, purposes which no Supreme Court should be able to overturn.
I think I looked at an article that you wrote, and you said basically that, and I call them the Beltway bandits, that Washington, those politicians, I think the way you put it, they've lost our trust and instilled or gained our fear, instilled fear. A lot of these people fear the federal government, and 67 or 68% of the people, when asked that question, you talk about the opening of the show, think that the federal government is a bigger danger, more of a threat to our individual security and our individual liberty than ISIS or any foreign nation.
Yes,
right?
Yes, okay. That's right. That's right. And this was something Lincoln saw this, John Adams, same thing. They recognized that democracies always die, if they die, by suicide. And I regard Article 5 as the last-ditch effort here to prevent us from committing suicide.
CPR for the Republic.
Say that again, Lou.
CPR for the Republic.
Yeah. Well,
very good. Yes. It's nice.
I call it a full body cleanse or a political enema. I think that's what we need, a political enema.
See, you can make anything sound horrible. How do you do that?
I speak the truth and endure the consequences.
It's a Navy thing.
I want to grab the audience by the rear end and suck them right in and make them understand the volatility of this situation and how threatened you are. And they don't even know it. Most of them don't even know it, Lou. Their individual liberty is threatened. I want to suck them in and educate them. The lunatic professor that I am.
I think you just have a mouth like a sailor.
I'm not a sailor. I'm a aviator. And I like what Dr. Lindsey was saying about how the governor in his speech at the Texas Public Policy Foundation in January said, this is not an end. These proposals, these 9 proposals, I believe, is not an end. It's a beginning. It's where we begin this dialogue to restore our democratic, our constitutional republic based on democratic principles. That's incredibly articulate, and the people need to understand that. One problem we're facing, and Lou's not going to like this, I'm going to say it anyway, Dr. A always says, and we're going to have a couple of shows on cultural Marxism, which I think is infecting our nation, and especially in the university system. We've got these people out there that are being poorly, improperly educated by our professors. I say they've been mind raped. They have had their minds taken from them forcibly and filled their heads with all this cultural Marxist crap that never ever works. And yet they go out there with their signs and they're marching around. They block roads in Arizona and thinking they're being Democrats. They're thinking they're exercising their democratic rights. They're not.
But you say that I'm not going to like it, like I don't agree with you, and I do agree with you, because when I was a political science student, I had plenty of professors who attempted to brainwash me. At
CPAC, you and Kevin Sorbo's wife, Samantha Sorbo, jumped all over me for using that word, mind rape.
No, we don't like that.
No, Dr. A, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think that at the root of our political and economic crises in this country is an educational crisis. Yeah. Ronald Reagan said, and I think he was correct, that liberty is always only one generation away from extinction.
Yep.
And how do we perpetuate liberty in a constitutional republic? By instilling in our young people an understanding of and a devotion to those principles that keep us free. that has been entirely lost thanks to the abdication by our universities over the past half century of their responsibility for civic education.
That's absolutely true, and we're going to talk about that. One of the lecture notes in that book, Politics in America by me, talks about the future of our university system, and talks about liberalism, which we know that word has completely changed from what classic liberalism used to be. It's completely different now. Progressive liberalism, Democrat, means nothing but Marxist communism, and that's what's happening right now. That started with FDR. He told me don't use that word socialist, use that word progressive. And that's the problem. They're being ill-served by these cultural Marxist professors. I was universally loathed by the professors. I taught at Tulane, LSU, University of San Diego, University of California, San Diego, LSU, all these different places, UNO, and they knew when they saw me coming, I was going to speak the truth boldly and endure the consequences. They don't want to hear that. You know what? Communism only works, I said this before, communism only works in two places. In a faculty lounge where overeducated fools dream of it, and in hell where condemned souls already experience it.
Very nice, yes. I would agree with that. And, that's another benefit, I think. The Convention of States movement could ultimately fail, quote unquote, and still succeed in one of two ways. And the first way, Dr. A just pointed to, and that is re-educating Americans about the liberating power and dignity of our Constitution. I am sure that through no fault of their own, I don't blame American citizens, they weren't taught this anymore. They don't know that states, and therewith the state citizens, have this power under Article 5. This movement by itself could help to educate them about what the proper balance is or should be between the states and the federal government. Department of Education statistics show that today fewer than 1 in 3 American college students graduate having taken even one course in American government, and that's because universities don't require it anymore. So they either don't teach the Constitution, or if they do, they teach it badly. And so when we wonder why young people today are so attracted to doctrines that deny individual liberty and that fight limited government, this is the reason why. It's because of what they're being taught at our universities. And until and unless we address that problem, we are going to continue to preach a message that falls on deaf ears when it comes to the American people.
I don't know if you heard the mantra for this show, but I always, when I teach at any university, but the mantra of the show is "Wake up, America. I think I got something to say to you." And I tell my students, after I introduce myself, I turn to them and I say, I love the United States of America. And I want you to love the United States of America too. And, when they come to office hours, they listen to the show, or they take a class from me, I tell them, this is not a safe space. You got to enter at your own risk. This is not childcare here on the campus of UCLA. This is real university. And you will be exposed to truth, and I'll endure the consequences. I never tell my students, I say, look, rest assured, I'm not going to try to put my brain into your head, but what I'm going to do is motivate you to think and use the analytical part of your brain that very few people want to use. Why? Because it requires actual work, it requires actual effort, and nobody wants to do that. But I motivate them to do that, and that's the whole purpose of my teaching at the universities. And for the show, as a matter of fact.
I think if more Americans had you, were able to take you for a class, we'd be in better shape, because I think you're absolutely right. We need to teach Americans again that we, the people, already possess our natural rights before government is ever instituted. Today, you hear this said nowadays, and no one objects to it, that our rights come from government. That is absolutely contrary to the political philosophy of both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. When we say natural rights, it means the rights are ours by, as the Declaration says, by nature and nature's God.
That's correct.
And through the compact that is our Constitution, we the people, we agree to delegate some of our pre-existing natural authority to government, but only so far and for so long as the federal government remains faithful to the liberty-promoting purposes for which it was established. And I think learning that lesson alone will be immensely helpful for the American people.
And John Locke, who is one of Lou's favorite political philosophers, basically said, if the government breaks the fiduciary trust of the people have the right, they have the obligation to institute a new government, get rid of that government, those people, and create a new one. And we're going to take a break here. Lou's going to have time to fully record what she just said about all these people needing to take Dr. A, and she's going to make sure that Miss Stacy and JD hear that. And we'll take a break and come back. Okay, Lou, do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with it. We need to take a break. I don't know about the rest of it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Spark Radio Network.
I looked all over, so how can it be? Here comes the wrecking ball, swinging at me.
K98 Talk is continuing to expand its lineup. This means we are expanding our advertising base. Whether you're a startup trying to push through to the next level or an established business trying to supplement your advertising budget, web-based advertising is a solid investment. Thanks to Talk's newest partnership with TuneIn Radio and instant access to our sister station, K98 FM, we give you worldwide access at a reasonable cost. Interested parties should email us at advertise@k98talk.org.
They know I mean well and smiling is hell if they try. They open their mouths, only hatred spews out with their lies.
Okay, we're back. Office Hours with Dr. A, our very special guest, Dr. Tom Lindsey from the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Recently, listeners, President Barack Obama nominated Justice Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court of the United States, that vacancy that was created in the aftermath of Justice Antonin Scalia's death. Tom, could you take a couple minutes here and explain the constitutional process of a SCOTUS nomination?
Yes, it's a twofold process. The president nominates, but for a Supreme Court justice to be approved, that has to go through what's called advice and consent of the Senate, meaning a majority of the senators have to vote for the president's nominee, and it doesn't always happen. You might remember back in 1987, Robert Bork was nominated by Ronald Reagan, and that was rejected. Then Douglas Ginsburg was nominated in his place and forced to withdraw, and finally Justice Kennedy was approved.
Okay, then now the history of the Senate, and I call it their constitutional privilege and their duty to provide advice and consent to our president when he nominates a judge to the Supreme Court. It's been kind of a long history. And like you said, I think it was the last one that was actually voted down after like 12 or 14 or 20 of these meetings with the committee was Bork, and he was rudely shot down. I thought he was a wonderful jurist. What's your opinion on that and the history of this process?
Yes, I agree. I think that Robert Bork was someone who takes the Constitution very seriously and who would have been very careful not to substitute his policy preferences for the principles of the Constitution. So I was sad to see that he was not approved. But now, as far as your second question here about the history of it, and this speaks to the issue today, there's no requirement. I mean, if the Senate says we're not going to hold hearings on your nominee, that is fulfilling its duty, because what it's saying to the president is, we don't think enough of your nominee or of the circumstances to devote time to this right now, and they are perfectly entitled to do that if they want to.
I agree, and the longest wait in the history of this SCOTUS nomination process, the longest wait for a nominee before he received a vote, I think was about 4 months, like 25 days, back in the turn of the century, about 1916. I think that was the Louis Brandeis, and the longest vacancy on the Supreme Court was like 27, so like 2 years and a few months. back in the Civil War era. So let me ask you this question. Why should an appointment to the Supreme Court matter to an average American citizen?
Well, it matters more and more, in part for the reasons we've been discussing, and that is, contrary to the Constitution, the Supreme Court has increased the power of the federal government, and through that method increased its own power. And so Americans who are concerned about decisions, for example, the Obergefell decision last summer, which now finds in the 14th Amendment a right for gay marriage in all 50 states, Roe versus Wade, which you mentioned earlier, which purports to find in the Constitution the right to an abortion. If Americans are concerned about these sorts of decisions, then they need to understand that the next person who's appointed to the Supreme Court, especially given the fact that right now it's about 4-4 on most issues, that this is going to have a profound effect on their lives for at least the next 20, 30 years.
There's been talk of a recess appointment. I think, if I'm not mistaken in my history, President Eisenhower did a recess appointment for a justice named William Brennan, who turned out to be a fairly good justice. I can't imagine the type of perfect storm that would brew up if Mr. Obama even tried to make a recess appointment. I don't think the Senate, or for that matter the House, are ever really in recess if they don't want to be. They can always have somebody stay behind and say that they are in session. So I'm not sure. Do you think that would ever possibly be come to fruition, a recess appointment?
Yeah. Well, I think that it would have been more likely if the president hadn't been smacked down in his previous attempt to create what he called a recess appointment, which was found not to satisfy the requirements of a recess appointment. So I think you're right that the Senate will be very wary and make sure that there's no window left open long enough for him to attempt to do this.
Didn't the Supreme Court go to 9 justices in 1868 or 69? 1869, I believe. They went to 9 justices, or was it earlier than that? I can't remember myself.
I think you're right. I think it was right after the end of the Civil War. Okay.
And you know what? There have been other nominees who did get hearings in presidential election years, but it was back in 1968, I believe, where the Democratic-controlled Senate passed a resolution that says we're not going to even have hearings for anybody nominated in an election year. They passed that themselves, and now they don't want to hear to that. Schumer and President Obama, they don't want to hear about that.
That's right, and even more recently than that, then Senator, now Vice President Biden said the same thing. In fact, when President Obama was Senator Obama, he opposed. He wanted to filibuster the hearing on to confirm Justice Alito, and at a press conference after the passing of Justice Scalia, he was asked about his decision and how that didn't contradict what he was calling on the Senate to do now. And his response was, "I regret that decision, but now I want the Senate to vote on this."
Yeah. Well, I want to segue here to something that really is important with this current nominee, and I think is important to anybody out there that believes. And I believe our president is I call him an Islamo-communist. Everybody have a drink, because he's a Muslim, clandestine Muslim, radical one in my view, and a cultural Marxist who wants to have this nation overthrown and become a socialist communist nation. I truly believe that. So here's what I have to say to the people out there listening. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What does the left not understand about that Second Amendment, Tom?
Oh boy, yeah, that's a good point, because what they do understand is that they hate it, and it seems that they will leave no stone unturned in their effort to deprive us of the right to bear arms. And we talked about the Declaration of Independence a few minutes ago. The Declaration of Independence offers what we call the American theory of justice, and that consists of the 4 self-evident truths of the Declaration: that we're created equal, that we're endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights, that government be instituted by consent, and then fourth and last, as you talked about earlier, Dr. A, the right of the people to rebel when government becomes destructive of the purposes for which it was established. Now, without arms, how can the people ever exercise that right?
I agree, and you got to be careful, Tom, when you mention Locke, because Lou, my producer, gets all excited. She wants me to do a whole show on the wisdom of John Locke, which I promised I would do.
And haven't done yet.
Yeah, I know. Earlier I asked, why should an appointment to the Supreme Court matter to an average citizen? The Second Amendment. If you've got a would-be tyrant that wants to inflict totalitarian rules on this country, the last thing they do, they've already done several of things. They've got control of the media. They control education, dissemination of information. They have a control of basically what's happening with our social rights for health care. You take the weapons away. That's the last vestige of individual liberty that we as Americans have. If they can get those weapons from us, there's going to be no stopping a communist revolution, in my humble opinion. Can you comment on that, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, as we said here, as our founding fathers knew, without a strong obstacle to a government expansion that grows to the point that individual liberty shrinks to nothing, without something to preserve and protect the rights of the people, then we're just resting on faith in the good intentions of our governors. And the whole history of the world shows that faith is misplaced.
People don't understand this. The Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, is not granted by the Constitution. Neither is it in any manner dependent upon the Constitution for its existence. It's a natural self-protection right. The Second Amendment just protects that. It doesn't grant us the right. It protects us from having the federal government of stripping away that God-given, that natural right that we have. People forget that. Our rights do not come from that document, a brilliant document that it was. They come, natural rights from God. Our self-preservation and our right to have a weapon is granted. The Second Amendment just protects that right that we've been given prior to that document even being written.
Yes, exactly. And you mentioned Locke, and Locke tells us that, and the founders were great students of Locke. Locke tells us that in the state of nature, meaning in a condition without government, our rights are radically insecure because we don't have the means to defend ourselves. The reason we enter into the social contract and form government is to protect our rights, the first of which is the right to life. And so we can never be understood to give up the means of protecting those things for which we established government in the first place.
I agree. And Lou, are we getting close to the end here?
Yeah, you still got a few more minutes, though, Doc. You got in a couple more questions?
Okay. Well, there was a landmark decision. I think it was called D.C. versus Heller. And about 2008, I believe it was, and the Supreme Court basically handed down that landmark decision that held that the amendment protects an individual's right to possess and carry a firearm. Now, the states can limit, in some instances, the type of firearm that you have. I don't think I can have a bazooka. That's not going to really help me protect myself. I mean, it would help me protect myself. I can't have a tank, or I can't go get my F-18 or A-7 and park that and shoot that Gatling gun to protect myself. But as far as having normal traditional weapons around my house and to carry it, there's a whole new movement now, also, Dr. Lindsey, to have a national carry without any kind of restrictions. You can concealed carry. And there's several states that you have concealed carry rights without doing anything. And I don't think Georgia is one of those. They just started that. I'm not sure if Texas is. Maybe Texas is one of those. I don't know.
We've had concealed carry in Texas for some time. And what is so sad is that, those who criticize the Second Amendment on the grounds of safety, they've never looked at any of the studies, and they are all over the place. Those areas that have concealed carry, crime goes down.
Exactly.
Right, crime goes down. I grew up in Chicago. In Chicago, nobody can have a gun except the criminals. Right? I mean, that's the effect of these gun control laws, is preventing innocent, law-abiding people from being able to protect their homes and their families. The founding fathers would be rolling over their graves hearing that this is somehow required today.
Right, and you just said it, and I back this up by saying when I teach political science, whatever I do, I postulate this humble premise to my students. Politics is simple. Politics is easy. In fact, the undergirding dynamic of politics, Dr. Lindsey, hasn't changed since Plato and Aristotle were first conjuring up their political theories way back in ancient Greece. Politics is the authoritative allocation of value in society. In other words, who gets what, when, and how. If we make it complex, it's because we do it unnecessarily so. And I think a lot of the professors, a lot of the people that hold office want you to think it's complex and that only their brand of intellect can be serving in office and put out the public policies. Nothing could be further from the truth, Tom.
And that's right. A great way to end.
The founders had faith in the ability of the people to exercise what they called enlightened consent. In other words, while the people themselves may not be able to come together and deliberate all issues, the people are wise enough to recognize those leaders that do speak with knowledge. And, I mean, that's the fundamental faith of our democratic system. So these arguments that a few elites now have to rule us because the issues are just so complex for us average people to understand, that's not American democracy.
And that's the best way that we have ever ended a show, I think. So we're going to remind you that, first of all, thank you very much, Dr. Lindsey, for being on with us. You provided so much insight. What a great interview. We really, really appreciate it. It was a very quick hour. And you can catch us Tuesday nights, 5 p.m. WNJC in Philly. Thursday nights on K98 Talk at 8 p.m. for Office Hours with Dr. A. So
well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed talking to both of you.
Excellent.
Let's
lead the ring, God help us, and speak the truth, endure the consequences.
Yep, endure the consequences. Don't forget that you'll have to do that when you speak the truth. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
If you want to work until you keel over, have less of everything in retirement, or give back more of your hard-earned money to the stock market again, then just ignore me. But if you'd like to protect the money you save, receive a steady, predictable retirement income, and enjoy financial security for as long as you live, then listen to this. You can download a free report that reveals the wealth-building secrets Wall Street and the banks don't want you to know. You'll learn how you can get guaranteed growth, safety, and real prosperity without risking your money in the Wall Street casino, and how to get the money you need when you need it, simply by asking for it. This is the best way to have a 100% secure retirement and know your money will last as long as you do. To learn more about this method and to get your free report, go to 29security.com. That's the number 29security.com. 29security.com. Go to 29security.com.